I'm Liz Faublis, and this is Currents. It's a matter of conscience in Washington state, where a judge rules in favor of pharmacists who do not want to distribute emergency contraception. Plus, it was once a hidden addiction, but new light is being shined on the dangers of pornography.
But no film is going to change the society, but it just sheds light on something that I think people have forgotten today.
And it's anybody's game heading into two key presidential primary battles. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Well, birth control has certainly been a trending topic in the news these days, whether it's the ongoing debate between lawmakers and the Catholic Church about the Health and Human Services controversial contraception mandate, or the latest round of GOP debates where social issues, including the right to life, have become hot-button topics. People are speaking out loud and clear about what is perceived as the government's attacks on religious liberties and its violation of First Amendment rights. Now, just last week, a federal court in Tacoma, Washington, struck down a Washington law that requires pharmacists to dispense the morning after pill even when doing so would violate their religious beliefs. Eric Niffen, legal counsel for the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, which represents the plaintiffs in that case, called this a resounding victory in the fight to preserve religious liberty. I spoke with Eric earlier today about the outcome of the case and what, if any, implications this victory may have on the HHS mandate. Now, Eric, I just want to flesh this out a little bit more for our viewers. The case is Stormans versus Selesky, and the plaintiffs we're talking about today are family-owned pharmacies, not the mega chain brick and mortars. Now, is this an important distinction in this case?
It's a really important distinction, and I think it's a great reminder that First Amendment protection does not only exist for churches, but it exists not only for religious organizations, but also for individuals and for businesses as well.
Now, the drugs in question, which are Plan B and Ella, both taken after unprotected sex and essentially block a fertilized egg from implanting in the womb. And I just really want to clarify, this is important because this is the challenge to conscience and religious beliefs for these plaintiffs, correct? The drugs can have an effect tantamount to abortion.
That's right. Our clients are evangelical Christians, and what they were saying is we do not want to be forced to participate in what we believe to be the destruction of human life.
Now, Judge Layton, which is the judge in the case, says that it did not strike down Washington's rules, is my understanding, but said simply that the way they were applied to the plaintiffs in this case was unconstitutional. Now, the government and the Board of Pharmacies actually threatened to yank their licenses. Am I correct?
The actual outcome has not yet happened, but the Board of Pharmacy made clear at the trial that at the end of the day, they would take the position that really the only recourse they would have to address the recalcitrance of our clients would be to revoke their license.
Now, Eric, these rules date back to 2007, I want to mention. Now, the court says that the Board of Pharmacy's regulations, they're not neutral, they're not generally applicable, and state lawyers try to argue that the rules apply to all meds that promote a government interest, which is the timely delivery of medicine, and that includes Plan B, which becomes less effective as time passes. Now, my question to you is, will this be one of the grounds for a possible appeal in this case?
We'll see. I'm not quite sure how they're going to attack this on appeal. But, the idea that this was not neutral and generally applicable, Judge Layton said that he found that we had presented reams of evidence that these rules were not neutral and generally applicable. They might seem so on paper, but in practice, the government was letting all sorts of pharmacies do whatever they wanted in stocking and dispensing drugs, and they could choose not to for a wide variety of business or convenience reasons, and that the only real effect of these rules was to block our clients and people like them from enjoying their First Amendment rights.
And Eric, while I have you here, I want to ask, what implications do you think this ruling will have on the ongoing controversy over the HHS mandate? Now, does it set an important precedent? Does it help set the stage for any lawsuits you may have pending surrounding this mandate?
The Becket Fund has 4 lawsuits challenging the federal government over the HHS mandate, and we see strong parallels between these cases. I'll mention two. First of all, in both instances, the government says it has this neutral policy goal of expanding access to medications, but in both cases, the government is advancing its interests very selectively and is putting the burden disproportionately on religious groups. Secondly, the government says that it's really trying to expand access, but in the way it's doing it, it appears that what it's really trying to do is squeeze religious minorities out of the public square.
Mm-hmm. Eric, you know, something that really stuck with me while I was reading the case was the judge saying that this wasn't just an attack on religious conscience. The judge in Washington writes that refusals to deliver these drugs were also protected for the secular reasons, which is an important point that you made as well. Other kinds of drugs, like say OxyContin, were protected because of stuff like expense and safety and inconvenience. Why was this an important argument?
What the judge there was doing was showing that there are a lot of other reasons why pharmacies might choose to not stock or dispense a drug, because they're too expensive, because it is too much of a hassle, because it's too labor intensive, and so it's not profitable for them. And the Board of Pharmacy was okay with pharmacies making these sorts of business and convenience reasons, but it wasn't okay with pharmacists making religious-based reasons, even though the business reasons had a larger impact on access to drugs than the religious reasons.
And one final question, Eric. Illinois recently had its regulations, which are kind of modeled on Washington, struck down as unconstitutional in a challenge brought by you guys, the Beckett Fund. You think we're going to start seeing state-by-state referendums similar to this?
Well, Illinois and Washington are the only two states that have gone so far as to try to put pharmacists in this double bind, and both of those rules have been struck down as unconstitutional. So we hope that that will be a strong warning to other states who are considering similar rules.
All right, Eric, thank you. That's the final word. Probably be talking to you a lot more about this in the future, but thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Stay tuned, there's more currents ahead. Phone call from the White House. We'll hear why President Obama reached out to the head of Notre Dame University. That story and the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Liz Faublas. Coming up later, it's an addiction that's getting more and more attention. A documentary maker discusses the perils of pornography. But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. Well, Cardinal Timothy Dolan added his signature to a list of prominent religious leaders and academics opposing the Health and Human Services mandate. The statement, which has the support of communities across multiple faiths, rejects the mandate requiring employers to provide contraception, sterilization, and abortion-inducing drugs. Now, Cardinal Dolan, who is also president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, had previously spoken out against the mandate, as well as President Obama's attempt at a compromise. In a video on the Bishop Conference's website, the Cardinal said the bishops did not see much sign of a compromise. He said he hopes President Obama will keep his word to work this out with the bishops. Meanwhile, Notre Dame University's newspaper reports the school's president spoke with Obama before this year's announcements on the mandate. Now, the university spokesman tells the Notre Dame Observer that President Obama called university president Father John Jenkins before the initial mandate announcement and the compromise attempt. Now, the paper reports Father Jenkins will keep the lines of communication with President Obama open. Father Jenkins was the subject of much scrutiny back in 2009 when Notre Dame awarded President Obama an honorary degree and allowed him to speak at the school's spring commencement. At issue, bestowing such an honor on the president, as well as giving him a platform. Well, elsewhere, San Francisco's Archbishop is the latest to weigh in on the contraception mandate. Archbishop George Niederauer says the issue in question is not contraception. Writing in the San Francisco Chronicle, Niederauer says that there is a radically new and sharply diminished approach to how government will define religious liberty in the future. Now, the Archbishop writes that in this process, immensely deep questions of fundamental liberty are being shoved aside. All that said, a new Gallup survey finds that majority of Americans think the mandate is unconstitutional. 72% of Americans overall feel the mandate is unconstitutional. 94% of Republicans, 71% of independents, and 56% of Democrats think that the mandate goes against the Constitution. Almost half of respondents say they favor repealing the overall health care law. Over in Syria, the situation seems to worsen. Thousands of people have reportedly been killed in fighting between Syrian forces and opposition activists.
The International Commission of Inquiry report, which was published on 22nd February, concluded that the human rights situation has deteriorated significantly since November 2011. It found that, I quote, "the government has manifestly failed in its responsibility to protect the population. Its forces have committed widespread, systematic and gross human rights violations amounting to crimes against humanity, with the apparent knowledge and consent of the highest levels of the state."
And the Italian news agency ANSA reports that armed men raided a monastery in Damascus last week. The priest who leads the monastery says the men were looking for money and weapons, demanding to speak to the person in charge. The priest says it is not clear who the gunmen were. And a similar scene in Pakistan, where a mob stormed a school in Lahore, accusing a Christian woman teaching there of burning the Quran. Asia News reports that police are investigating whether the situation warrants formal charges. Christian activists and an official who advises the Pakistani government on minority affairs are monitoring the situation closely. Separately, a new book chronicles the struggle of another Pakistani Christian woman who was sentenced to die for blasphemy against Islam. In the case, which has garnered a lot of attention, Asiya Bibi says she was falsely accused of blasphemy after a disagreement with a co-worker. EWTN News reports a Spanish publisher has issued a new book by Bibi. In it, she writes about her imprisonment. Bibi is awaiting a ruling on an appeal of her death sentence. Finally, a lawyer for the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru says the school will not comply with a Vatican ultimatum. A Peruvian news website reports a formal announcement was expected from the university today. The lawyer says the school would be forced to remove the word pontifical from its name, but not the word Catholic. The university would also retain its land. Well, stay tuned. There's more currents ahead. Coming up, bringing a hidden addiction out of the darkness.
Pornography is destroying our world in so many different ways, and people don't realize it. And then I find the depth, and I understand the depth of how it can destroy someone's life.
Welcome back. Well, data shows it generates more revenue than Hollywood and the major sports combined. And although many people look at it as a harmless diversion or an escape from everyday life, others believe it's an addiction. We're not talking about alcohol or drugs, but an addiction to pornography. Unlike other habits, it's not one that you need to leave your house to feed. Just a tap on the keyboard and a click of the mouse satisfies the latest fix. Many people are speaking out against porn, warning about the effects it has on the user and his or her relationships with others. We heard from one filmmaker who produced a documentary with a unique look at the porn industry and its wide reach. He spoke last night at Theology on Tap in Manhattan.
Everybody has been affected by pornography. It is everywhere. Any of these things, it just wears away your self-esteem. You have no confidence, you know, and you think it just takes over more and more in your life. You don't think you can serve the way that you're supposed to.
For our first talk of 2012, was here Sean Finnegan. Talk about his film, Out of the Darkness, which is a documentary film that he produced and directed about the dangers of the porn industry.
You know, often these girls they're from bad homes and they're very vulnerable. They find themselves in this situation, and most of them regret it. I mean, most girls who do pornography do one or two films and then disappear, you know. But the effect of what they've done is lifelong, and it follows them everywhere.
God made us as, you know, pure human beings, as holy people, as people that need to respect each other, respect each other's minds, respect each other's souls, respect each other's bodies. Pornography goes against all that, you know. It treats human beings as animals.
The things we look at and read and listen to have an impact on us. They affect us. They matter. And when someone starts looking at pornography, even if it's only one time, they are entering into a very dark world that has an extremely narrow vision of the human person. It presents people as someone to be used and then thrown away. We, as a society, and as Christians and Catholics, have to ask why. I think, in one sense, I want people to realize that when they go to a website or something or watch a video, there is actually another human being on the other side of that who has to suffer a great deal to produce this material, and they're going through a lot. And I also had hoped really that people would get a better sense of sort of the high calling of life, you know, that sin and pornography, these things are beneath human dignity, that we're called to much more.
You're literally re-victimizing these women every time you are looking at pornography. So we wanted to kind of create this, sort of attention and let people know that they're actually looking at real people.
Pornography is destroying our world in so many different ways, and people don't realize it. Because I know someone very close to me who was involved with pornography, that it destroyed his life, and also from listening to tonight's talk that it actually does destroy someone's life.
Around a lot of my friends, people don't really understand the dangers of pornography, and it really does affect people's personal lives, obviously, but the community and their families, which is makes a huge impact on society.
We think pornography is affecting our culture at large. If we can sort of make people aware of that, they might be more open to the idea of reestablish some sort of virtue as they move forward.
I hope they come away with understanding why this is a problem, and I hope it'll help them in their relationship with their boyfriend or girlfriend, their spouses as well.
Stay tuned, there's more Currents ahead. When we return, church, state, and cars.
I'm for separation of church and state.
I drive a Mustang and a Chevy pickup truck. Ann drives a couple of Cadillacs, actually.
Anything is fair game as the primary battles get more heated. Finally tonight, it is decision day in Michigan and Arizona for the Republican presidential candidates. Voters will decide among 4 men vying to unseat President Obama in November. Now, with 2 Catholics and a Mormon among the array of candidates, faith has been an issue on the campaign trail. Just this past weekend, during an interview on ABC's This Week, former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum said that he believed people of faith should play a part in government. Santorum drove that point home again during an appearance in Michigan yesterday.
You hear so much about separation of church and state. I'm for separation of church and state. The state has no business telling what the church to do. But the separation of church and state that our founders believed in, which is what I just described, has now been turned on its head. And now it's the church, people of faith, who have no right to come to the public square and express their points of view or practice their faith outside of their church.
But faith is just one aspect of the 2012 primary battle, and with candidate Mitt Romney hoping for a victory in his home state of Michigan, CNN's Jim Acosta reports anything the candidates say is fair game.
We started off about, 15 points down in the polls. Now we're leading in the polls. Thanks, you guys. Appreciate the support.
Caught in a dogfight with Rick Santorum in the Wolverine State, Mitt Romney is scrambling to claw his way out of Michigan with a victory.
Senator Santorum's a nice guy, but he's never had a job in the private sector.
Desperate to avoid a trip down into Al Gore country that is losing his home state, Romney is sharpening his lines of attack, taking note of a Santorum op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, where his GOP rival lays out his economic plan.
I'm glad he recognizes this has got to be a campaign about the economy. It's time for him to really focus on the economy.
Santorum's plan calls for approval of the Keystone Oil Pipeline, plus big reductions in income and corporate taxes, and $5 trillion in cuts in federal spending. But Santorum has at times strayed from that message.
The President of the United States said the other day that every child in America should go to school. What a snob.
Whether it's accusing the president of trying to send young people to college to, in Santorum's words, indoctrinate them in liberalism, or criticizing John F. Kennedy's 4 decades-old call for the separation of church and state.
To say that people of faith have no role in the public square, you bet that makes you throw up.
But Romney has hit his own speed bumps. The Romney campaign is downplaying a comment he made at the Daytona 500, where he told a reporter that he doesn't really follow NASCAR. The comment made to an Associated Press sports reporter was later picked up by the liberal-leaning website Think Progress.
Not as closely as some of the most ardent fans, but I have some great friends that are NASCAR team owners.
It sounded to some Republicans like another cringe-inducing gaffe, like his description of the Romney car collection at a mostly empty Ford Field in Detroit.
I drive a Mustang and a Chevy pickup truck. Ann drives a couple of Cadillacs, actually. And I used to have a Dodge truck, so I used to have all 3 covered.
All of this may explain why Newt Gingrich is still smiling. Taking a pass on this week's contests in Arizona and Michigan, Gingrich is looking ahead to Super Tuesday and even to the Republican convention in Tampa.
I think Governor Romney has to carry Michigan. I think he has an enormous amount at stake. I mean, you could have all 4 of us in Tampa. You could even have number 5 and 6 if somebody gets excited and jumps in.
And that report from CNN's Jim Acosta. That's all for this edition of Currents. Coming up tomorrow, what role will Catholics play in the public square? We'll get one writer's take on that. Until then, be sure to visit us online at currentsny.net. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Faublis. Thank you for watching and have a good night.